The smell of sawdust never really leaves you. After 40 years of working with your hands, framing houses, laying foundations, pouring concrete in the Alabama heat, it gets into your skin, your lungs, the creases around your knuckles. My wife used to say I smelled like a lumberyard, even fresh out of the shower. She wasn't wrong. Back then, she said it like she loved it. That was before, for the past 6 years. My mornings have started the same way. I wake up at 5:15 without an alarm, pull on my work boots while it's still dark, and walk the 40 feet from my back door to the garage. I converted into a workshop the first winter after everything fell apart. I turn on the single overhead bulb, and I get to work. Some men drink. Some men disappear into television. I build things. Right now it's a cedar chest, the kind with dovetail joints and a fitted lid. The kind my father built for my mother in 1967, and that still sits at the foot of her bed in her house in Tuscaloosa. Building it keeps my hands busy, keeps my head quiet. My name is Robert Aldridge. I am 63 years old. I am a retired general contractor. And 6 years ago, my daughter stood in the driveway of the house I built with my own hands and told me to get out. She didn't say it loudly. That was the thing about my daughter. She never raised her voice. She stood there in a pale yellow blazer, her arms crossed, to her chin up, and she said, "Dad, the lawyers have finished the paperwork. The business is transferred. You should go ahead and clear out your things from the office by Friday." She said it the way you'd tell a plumber. You no longer needed his services. Polite. Efficient. Final. My son-in-law, Derek, stood slightly behind her with his hands in his pockets. He didn't say anything. He never had to. My daughter did all the talking. She always had. Her name is Carolyn. She was 37 at the time. I drove to a friend's place that night and slept on a pull-out couch for 2 weeks before I found a rental house on the east side of Decatur. 1,200 square feet. Thin walls. A cracked driveway. I didn't care. I brought my tools, my truck, and a cardboard box of photographs. I left most everything else behind. The house I built, I left behind. The business I built, I left behind. The version of my life I thought I was living, I left that behind too. What I could not leave behind was the question that followed me into every room of that small rental house, that sat with me at the kitchen table in the mornings, that woke me up at 3 a.m., more times than I can count. How did it happen? Aldridge Construction had been my father's company before it was mine. He started it in 1971 with a second-hand truck and a crew of 3. By the time he handed it to me in 1989, it had 12 employees and a reputation in North Alabama that took 20 years to build. By 2018, when I brought Carolyn in as operations director, we had 41 employees, contracts with 2 county school districts, and a line of credit that had never once been touched. I was proud of that, prouder than I had been of almost anything. Carolyn had a business degree from Auburn and an energy I admired. She was sharp, organized. She could read a spreadsheet faster than anyone I'd ever seen. I thought bringing her in was the right thing for the company, for the family, for the future. I told myself I was building something to pass down. That's what my father had done for me. What I didn't see, what I refused to see for far too long, was what she was actually building. Over 2 years, she moved quietly. She renegotiated vendor contracts I didn't know were being renegotiated. She brought in Derek, who had a background in commercial real estate. As a strategic advisor, she had documents drafted, adjusted, revised. She had conversations with the company attorney that I wasn't part of. And when she finally presented me with a restructuring proposal in the spring of 2019, The paperwork was so thorough, so complete, so precisely designed to look like a routine succession plan, that I signed it over 2 meetings without understanding what I was actually signing. I was 62. I had been working since I was 15. I was tired in a way. I didn't have words for, and my daughter was sitting across the table from me with a calm, patient smile, telling me this was the right move, that I deserved to rest, that she would take care of everything. I believed her. By October 2019, I had no legal standing in the company my grandfather had named. I didn't understand it fully until the attorney I eventually hired reviewed the documents and went quiet for a long moment before he said, "Robert, these transfers were executed properly. I don't see grounds for reversal." I sat with that for a while. "Properly?" I said. "Yes. Sir, she's my daughter." He looked at me over his glasses and said nothing. There was nothing to say. What followed was 2 years of attempting, through other attorneys, to find some angle, some error, some thread I could pull. I spent money I didn't have. I got close once an email chain surfaced suggesting Derek had coached Carolyn on how to time the signing to coincide with a period when I was dealing with a minor health scare and was, in the words of one email, likely to be agreeable. My attorney called it significant. The opposing counsel called it normal business communication. The judge agreed with opposing counsel. I stopped fighting after that, not because I accepted it, but because I understood that continuing meant spending my retirement fighting in rooms where the outcome had already been decided. I was done spending what I had left, chasing what was already gone. So I went home to my workshop. I built furniture. I took small jobs, a deck here, a fence repair there. Work I did alone, or with one helper. Cash transactions. Nothing that required me to be Robert Aldridge of Aldridge Construction. Just a man who knew how to work wood and wasn't afraid of the heat. I did not hear much from Carolyn in those years. A text on my birthday. Twice. One Christmas card with a printed signature. Nothing that required a response. I did not reach out either. Some silences, once they reach a certain depth, are not safe to disturb. I want to be honest about something. In those years in the rental house, in the workshop, in the long, quiet evenings, with nothing but the radio and the cedar chest taking shape under my hands, I was not at peace. I want to tell you I made my peace and moved on like a man in a movie. I didn't. I was angry for a long time. Not the hot kind of angry, but the cold, heavy kind that sits at the bottom of your chest and makes everything a little harder. I thought about what I should have seen, what I should have done differently, whether my father would have been ashamed of me for letting it happen. I thought about my ex-wife, Margaret, Carolyn's mother. We had divorced when Carolyn was in college, an ending that was quiet and civil and sad in the way only 22 years ending can be. Margaret had moved to Nashville. We had stayed in occasional contact, the careful, cordial kind. I knew she had done well for herself. She had gone back to work in commercial real estate after the divorce and built something substantial over the years. We had spoken 3 times in the 6 years since Carolyn pushed me out, each time brief, each time polite, each time leaving more unsaid than was said. The last time we spoke was 14 months before the phone call. It was a Thursday morning in early March when my cell phone rang and I didn't recognize the number. Nashville area code. "Is this Robert Aldridge?" The voice was male, professional. "It is Mr. Aldridge. My name is Thomas Weston. I'm an estate attorney based in Nashville. I'm calling because you've been named in the estate documents of Margaret Ann Voss. I'm sorry to inform you that Mrs. Voss passed away on February 28th. I set down the handplane I was holding. I sat down on the stool next to the workbench. I see. I said, I know this may be unexpected. When you're ready, I'd like to schedule a formal reading of the will. You've been listed as a primary beneficiary, and your presence is requested. I didn't say anything for a moment. Primary. I said, yes. Sir. I asked for the date. I wrote it on the back of a receipt from the hardware store. I thanked him and hung up. I sat in the workshop for a long time after that, not moving, listening to the hum of the fluorescent light. Margaret. She had been sick. I learned later, had been sick for over a year. Hadn't told many people. That was like her. She had a self-sufficiency that was sometimes hard to distinguish from coldness. But it wasn't coldness. It was just how she moved through the world. Quietly. On her own terms. I didn't know how to feel. I hadn't loved her the way I once had in a long time. But she had been a part of my life for more than half of it. And now she was gone. And I sat with that, the way you sit with something that has no neat edges. Carolyn called me 2 days later. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. I assume you heard. She said. I heard. I wanted you to know before the reading that Mom made some decisions that are going to be, and she paused, that you should probably prepare yourself for. She had strong feelings about things. And she put them in writing. Oh, right, I said. I'm just being honest with you. You may find it disappointing. Her tone was the same as it always was. Measured. Controlled. Careful. Carolyn. I said, I appreciate you calling. She seemed slightly thrown by that. A short pause. Of course. She said, I'll see you there. She would see me there. That was the whole of it. I drove to Nashville on a Tuesday morning in a truck that had 214,000 miles on it and a crack in the windshield I'd been meaning to fix since November. I wore a jacket I'd bought in 2017 and pressed that morning for the first time. I stopped for coffee outside of Huntsville and sat in the parking lot for a while watching the traffic on the interstate. I thought about what Carolyn had said. You should prepare yourself for disappointment. She said it gently. But I knew what she was doing. She was managing the situation. She had always been good at that, laying the groundwork. Shaping expectations. Making sure the story was already told before anyone else could tell it. I thought about what I'd been through. I thought about the attorney who'd said, executed properly, and looked at me over his glasses. I thought about the cedar chest in my workshop. 3/4 finished. The dovetail joints cut by hand, because that's the only way to do it right. I thought whatever happens in that room today, you're still standing. That's more than they bargained for. The law office was in a building on West End Avenue, 12 stories. Glass and limestone. I parked in a garage 2 blocks away and walked. The lobby had marble floors and a security desk and the kind of quiet that expensive buildings have, the silence of people with enough money to insulate themselves from noise. Thomas Weston's office was on the 9th floor. The receptionist offered me water. I sat in a chair by the window and looked out at the city. Carolyn and Derek arrived together 11 minutes later. Carolyn saw me, and her expression shifted barely. Just a slight recalibration behind the eyes. She had not expected me to look the way I looked. I don't know exactly what she expected. Something smaller. Maybe. Someone older, in the way of a man worn down, rather than worn in. She recovered quickly. Dad, she said. The word came out of her mouth, like a formality. Carolyn. Derek shook my hand. Firm grip. Eye contact. The handshake of a man who had practiced looking trustworthy. Robert, he said. Good to see you. I nodded. We sat on opposite sides of the small conference table. There was a third chair occupied by a woman I didn't know, late 40s. Serious expression. introduced as a representative of a charitable foundation. I filed that away without comment. Thomas Weston came in exactly on time. He was younger than I expected, maybe 45. Salt and pepper at the temples. The bearing of someone accustomed to delivering news in rooms full of people who were hoping for different news. He shook hands with each of us, set a leather portfolio on the table, and sat. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "Before I begin, I want to note that Mrs. Voss prepared these documents herself over the course of 18 months, with our office providing legal structure, but no editorial guidance. What you're about to hear reflects her specific wishes and, in several instances, her specific words." He opened the portfolio. I noticed Carolyn straightened slightly in her chair. Weston read through the preliminary sections. First, the legal language, the confirmation of identity, the standard clauses. His voice was even and unhurried. Derek had his hands flat on the table. Carolyn held a pen she wasn't using. Then Weston paused, turned a page, and continued, "Regarding my daughter, Carolyn Elizabeth Voss Mercer." He read, "I leave the following my jewelry collection, currently held at First Tennessee Bank, to be distributed according to the attached list. My collection of first edition books, to be appraised and transferred within 60 days, and the sum of $1. The room went very quiet. Carolyn's pen stopped moving. Weston continued, without looking up. "The $1 is not an oversight. It is intentional. Carolyn knows why." Derek shifted in his chair. He opened his mouth and then closed it. I watched him decide not to speak. Weston turned another page. "Regarding my former husband, Robert James Aldridge." He read, and I felt something pull tight in my chest. "I leave the entirety of my estate, including all investment accounts, property holdings, and business interests, currently valued at approximately $4,200,000, to be transferred with no conditions. Robert earned nothing from me during our marriage, and asked for nothing after our divorce. What he lost in the years since was not his fault, and I have known that longer than I acted on it. This is late. It is not enough, but it is what I have." I looked at the table. I looked at my hands. "I also leave a letter," Weston continued, "addressed to both Robert and Carolyn jointly, to be read aloud at this reading per my instructions." Carolyn's voice came out flat and controlled. "I'd like to Mrs. Voss Mercer," Weston said, not unkindly. "These were your mother's specific instructions. I'm obligated to honor them." He withdrew a sealed envelope from the portfolio, opened it with a letter opener, and unfolded 3 handwritten pages. I will not recount every word Margaret wrote. Some of it belongs to me and Carolyn alone, and I am not ready to give all of it away. But the part that mattered, the part that changed the shape of everything I thought I understood, was this. Margaret had known about the restructuring. She had known while it was happening. Carolyn had told her, not as a confession, but as a strategy. She had wanted her mother's tacit support, or at least her silence. Margaret had given her that silence. She had told herself it was Carolyn's business, that Robert was difficult sometimes, that the company had always been a source of tension, that maybe letting go was better for everyone. She had told herself that for 6 years, and then she got sick. And lying in a hospital bed in Nashville with time becoming suddenly concrete, she had thought about what she'd allowed, about who she was, about the 22 years I had worked without complaint, built without asking for recognition, handed her everything I had during the divorce without a single lawyer's letter because I did not want to fight her, about the look on my face, which she had not seen but which she had imagined, standing in the driveway of my own house while my daughter told me to leave. She wrote I was afraid of losing her. I chose her over the truth. I have no defense. I only have this. Carolyn sat perfectly still through all of it. I could not see her face because I was looking at Weston's hands holding the pages, watching them turn. When he finished and folded the letter, the room held a silence that seemed to have weight. Are there questions regarding the distribution? Weston asked. Derek spoke first. On what grounds was the estate? The estate was entirely Mrs. Voss's separate property. Acquired after the divorce? Weston said. The distribution is not subject to challenge on that basis. The $1 Carolyn started is also not subject to challenge. Weston said, nominal bequests of this kind are legally established as intentional exclusions. Your mother was of sound mind and met with us on 4 separate occasions to confirm and refine these decisions. Carolyn turned and looked at me then. For the first time since we had sat down, she looked directly at me. I looked back. I had spent 6 years imagining what I would feel in a moment like this. I thought I would feel vindicated. I thought maybe I would feel something that resembled triumph. I had, in darker moments, imagined saying something sharp and deserved. I didn't feel any of that. I felt tired in the deep way. I felt something that was close to sorrow, not for myself, but for the whole shape of it, for Margaret, who spent 6 years carrying something she didn't have to carry, for Carolyn, who was sitting across from me looking like a person who had just discovered that the floor under her life was not what she thought it was. For the 20 years that could have been different. I thought of my father and the company he built. I thought of the cedar chest in my workshop, 3/4 finished. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. I'm going to take a few minutes. I said to Weston, I'll sign whatever I need to sign. He nodded and stepped out. I did not speak to Carolyn then. There was nothing to say in that room. With Derek beside her, and the formal furniture between us, what needed to be said, if it was ever going to be said, would happen in a different place and a different time, and only if she ever found herself ready to say it. I couldn't know if she would. That was not something I could control. What I could control was the drive back to Decatur. The workshop, the cedar chest. I finished the chest 3 weeks later. Dovetail joints cut by hand. Lid fitted to a 1/4 inch. Brass hardware I ordered from a company in Vermont. I put it in the corner of the workshop and sat on the stool and looked at it for a while. I thought about something Margaret had written near the end of her letter. Not the part about Carolyn, or the estate, or the 6 years. The part that came after. Just 2 sentences. I think about the houses you built. I think about how every one of them is still standing. I sat with that for a long time. I am not a man who is comfortable with attention or gratitude or the feeling of being owed something. I don't know exactly what I'll do with what Margaret left me. Some of it will go to secure the years I have left. Some of it, I think about this, may go toward something useful, something that outlasts me. My father believed in building things that lasted. I suppose that is still the only philosophy I know. My daughter has not called. I have not called her. The door is not locked. Whether it ever opens is not something I can decide alone. What I know is this. I wake up at 5:15. I walk to the workshop in the dark. I turn on the light, and I put my hands to work. Some mornings, that is enough. Some mornings, in the good way that surprises you after a long stretch of hard ones, it is more than enough. The sawdust smell is still there. It has always been there. I have stopped trying to wash it out.